A little while ago, I met a young man who told me that if I were to view socialness as a cup, then his cup was very small. Being invited to a party was enough for him. He couldn't possibly go, there'd be too many people, it'd be too noisy, and it would just make him feel uncomfortable. Just being invited made him feel socially integrated and included. Have you ever wondered about these differences between people? Why some people resonate easily with others and fit in socially, while others do not? Well, I'm interested in these differences between people. And one group of individuals that show differences are individuals on the autism spectrum, those with autism spectrum conditions. These are diagnosed on the basis of differences and deficits in social interaction and social communication. So somebody with an autism spectrum condition may not meet your eye gaze, may show differences in the natural to and fro conversation. The conversation may be stilted, or it may focus on special interests. They may also have difficulties in showing emotion either through their face or through gestures during communication. Also included within, also part of the diagnosis, are the presence of repetitive behaviours, interests and activities. So for instance, in children, this might exhibit itself in something like lining up cars in a row and doing this repetitively and to a great extent. Or in older individuals, it may be a fixation with a particular topic, such as trains, and knowing every train time in the country, every model of train, all about train stations. They may even recognise which train station this is. So, autism spectrum conditions are on a continuum, and the severity of symptoms can vary across that whole continuum. People in the typically developing population also vary in their level of autistic traits. So, and there seems to be a continuum running from those with autism spectrum conditions into the typically developing developing population, with those who have a diagnosis of autism having higher scores than those in the typically developing group. So there we go. But those in the typically developing group also show levels of autistic traits which go along a normal variation. So, who do you think would be higher on autistic trait measures, men or women? Men tend to be a little bit higher, and also tend to be more males diagnosed with autism spectrum disorders than females. So, thinking about these autistic traits, have you noticed that sometimes you might have noticed that between people they may show differences in their ability to respond socially or to respond to social cues. Now those sorts of behaviours might be predicted by autistic traits. So, sorry. We are all very socially orientated, to the extent that we will see faces, even in very strange areas, such as in this green pepper or in a plug. We may also impute emotion on inanimate objects. So looking at this doggy and this rabbit, you might say, don't they really love each other? Aren't they such good friends? Individuals with autism seem to do this to a lesser extent. So I'm interested in identifying the differences between individuals either with or without a diagnosis that may prove a barrier to social interaction. Now there's many factors involved in social interaction, and for the young man that I described earlier, maybe we'll want to look at some of the factors that may have prevented him from going to his party. Now one of these issues may be the ability to process emotion. So that might be recognizing emotion, portraying emotion, or remembering emotional events. Now I'm going to talk about just one very small aspect, and that is identifying emotion in the voice. And it's now late afternoon, but I'm going to ask you to work a little bit. So what I'd like you to do is try and identify the emotion that you hear portrayed in this voice. And I'm going to play you a little bit of a little sentence. And the emotion will either be anger, fear, happy, surprise, sad, or disgust. Okay, so let's try this one. Oh.
Really enjoyed playing football.
Okay, now we'll try the next one. And again, it's going to be anger, fear, happy, surprise, sad, or disgust.
So nervous about it.
Which one did you find easier? Second one. Now, they were both, I don't know if anybody picked this up, but they were both fear. Most people will find the second one easier because the emotion in the voice was congruent with the meaning of the sentence. The first one, the emotion in the sentence was more related to happiness. As I said, everyone finds it more difficult when the information is conflicting or incongruent. But those on the autism spectrum, either with a diagnosis of autism or with a high number of autistic traits, find it differentially more difficult. So we know that individuals on the autism spectrum find recognizing emotion difficult, particularly when the information is conflicting. So a more real-world example may be when there's sarcasm or irony. Okay, so whenever we go into our social world, we don't only have to listen to just a voice. We also have to deal with the whole environment. And individuals on the autism spectrum are more sensitive to sensory information and may find environmental differences more challenging. So let me demonstrate this by reading this quote. Intensely preoccupied with the movement of a spinning coin or lid, I saw nothing or heard nothing. People around me were transparent, and no sound intruded on my fixation. It was as if I were deaf. Even a sudden noise didn't startle me from my world. But when I was in the world of people, I was extremely sensitive to noises. So this is an individual with autism describing both hypo and hypersensitivity to sound. Hyposensitivity when they were talking about spinning a coin and just not really being able to hear anything around them at all. And then hypersensitive when they were in the world of people and not being able to bear that noise. Now, individuals with autism are more sensitive to sensory information, and they can have both hyposensitivity and hypersensitivity in the same individual. And this can go across into different senses, so into taste, smell, touch, and vision. So if we go back to my young friend at the beginning, perhaps it was the possibility of being in a position where there's overwhelming sensation that prevented him from going to the party, where he wouldn't be able to control his environment. And we've already heard, oh, sorry, I keep on pressing the wrong button. There we go. We've already heard that communication is key, and communication is a key difference for individuals with autism. So communication and not language per se. So individuals on the autism spectrum show differences in their language ability, and it can go from just having a few words, to no words or a few words, to being very highly verbal and highly skilled, such as a university professor. But what is it about communication that sets individuals on the autism spectrum apart? So what I'd like to do is just focus on one very small aspect, and that's looking at speech sounds. So there's a speech sound, ba will belong to a different category than the speech sound pa. And if we hear a word to non-word continuum, then we tend to be shifted towards the word. So, for instance, in this continuum of gift versus kift, you're going to be more likely to hear the word that you recognize. You're going to be more likely, even if it really is more like kift, you're going to be more likely to hear gift. And I'd like you to try this with me as well. So what you're going to hear, first of all, is you're going to hear a sound that sounds a bit more like gift. As we go down the continuum, some of you will start to hear kift. When you start to hear it, would you please put your hand up? Okay? So.
Gift. 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 Gift.
Okay. So, some of you, I don't think very many people heard kift at stage 4, but people who have a high number of autistic traits are more likely to hear it as it really is and be more likely to hear kift even at that ambiguous stage of stage 4. Whereas people who are typically developing are much more likely to be more shifted towards the word. So how do these differences play a part in the ability of an individual to communicate? And do these differences in processing play a larger part when there's ambiguity or when there's a higher load? For instance, perhaps within a noisy room. So what our lab is asking is whether there's a disturbance to the critical period in autism disrupting development and how much this might have an impact on later abilities. So whenever we go into a social interaction, we take all of ourselves with us. So we have to take our own mental states, and we heard a little bit about mental states earlier on. So we go into an interaction and we have to deal with being able to understand other people, the emotions that they have, but we also take in into that interaction how we feel ourselves, and that can have an effect on our interaction. Now, depression appears to be more common in individuals on the autism spectrum. And individuals on the autism spectrum seem to be more at risk of depression. Autistic traits are highly correlated with low mood, with loneliness, with having been bullied, and with having a negative attributional style. So for instance, if you were to apply for a job, how many applications do you think that you would need to send off before you got a reply? How many interviews do you think that you would need to have before you'd be offered the job? And if you didn't get the job, what would you attribute that to? Would you say, well, maybe I just wasn't quite the right fit. Maybe they had somebody with a different specialism. Someone with a negative attributional style or a depressive style of thinking may think, I'm worthless, I'm no good, I might as well give up, I'm never going to get a job. People on the autism spectrum are more likely to have a negative attributional style. And this negative attributional style can pervade into every relationship in your social life. Now, it's been suggested that conversing via a simplified environment may be a useful support for individuals on the autism spectrum. And social media helps with loneliness. Social media such as Facebook may actually help with loneliness, and it has been reported to help with loneliness. And autistic traits correlate with a preference for using some aspects of social media or computer-mediated communication, such as Facebook. And participants reported that this was helpful because they were able to control the timing of the interaction, so they didn't have to respond immediately to somebody. that they could control the context of the interaction. They didn't have to deal with all of that difficult environment where they couldn't control the environment. And they can control the complexity of the interaction, so they didn't have to necessarily be aware of somebody else's body movements, their eye movements, and the gestures that they were trying to get across. They could just look at text, much simpler. So not everyone will want to socialize in the same way, and not everyone will have the same needs socially, like my young friend at the beginning, who described his social cup as being very small. So autism spectrum conditions are very complex, with varying levels of severity and differences across the spectrum and levels of ability. It may be that it is time for us as a society to review the way we interact in many aspects of our lives, from education, healthcare, the workplace, and social settings, in order to be able to support some of these needs. Thank you very much.